The warning light flashed red at 15:47 hours on March 23, 1968, and Warrant Officer David Mitchell knew immediately that his Huey was going down. The hydraulic pressure gauge dropped to 0 in less than 3 seconds. The cyclic went stiff in his hands. Behind him in the cargo bay, the crew chief was already on the intercom, his voice tight but controlled. "Sir, we're trailing smoke. Heavy. Port side engine cowling." Mitchell scanned the instruments, his training taking over even as his mind processed the reality of what was happening. They were 12 miles northwest of Firebase Anderson, deep in the A Shau Valley. The altimeter read 800 feet and dropping. Airspeed was 110 knots and bleeding fast. Below them was triple canopy jungle. No clearings, no roads, no friendly positions for miles. The co-pilot, Lieutenant James Brennan, was already on the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Chalk 36 going down. Grid coordinates Yankee Delta 847-523, we are..." Static cut through his transmission. The radio was failing. Brennan tried again, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Any station, this is Chalk 36. We are going down in the valley. Grid Yankee Delta 847-523, 4 souls on board." Mitchell felt the Huey shudder as another system failed. The engine was still running, but barely. He had maybe 30 seconds of controlled flight left, maybe less. The tree line below was rushing up fast, too fast. He pulled back on the cyclic, trying to bleed off speed, trying to find anything that looked like a survivable landing zone. There was nothing, just jungle. Dense, green, hostile jungle that stretched in every direction as far as he could see. The kind of jungle where the enemy lived, where they moved freely, where they owned the ground. The kind of jungle where American helicopters didn't land unless they absolutely had to. And Mitchell absolutely had to. "Brace for impact," he shouted into the intercom. "Crew, secure everything. This is going to be hard." Behind him, he heard the crew chief and door gunner cinching down their harnesses, preparing for the crash. Brennan gripped the sides of his seat, his knuckles white. The altimeter read 300 feet, 200, 100. Mitchell aimed for a gap between 2 massive trees, a space barely wider than the Huey's rotor diameter. If he could thread it, if he could get the aircraft down between them, they might have a chance. If he missed, if the rotors clipped the trees, they would cartwheel into the jungle and everyone would die. 50 feet. The rotor wash was tearing leaves from the canopy. 40 feet. 30. The skids hit first, slamming into thick vegetation and soft earth. The Huey bounced, tilted hard to the left and came down again. The main rotor blade struck a tree trunk with a deafening crack. Metal shrieked. The tail boom twisted and then everything stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Mitchell's hands were still on the controls. He was alive. They were all alive. But they were down. In enemy territory. Miles from any friendly position. And the Huey wasn't flying again. Mitchell unbuckled his harness and turned to Brennan. "You hurt?" Brennan shook his head, his face pale but focused. "I'm good. Radio's dead." Mitchell nodded. He'd expected that. He keyed the intercom to the cargo bay. "Crew, sound off. Status." The crew chief, Sergeant Marcus Webb, responded immediately. "Chief's okay. Door gunner's okay. Aircraft is totaled. Main rotor's gone. Tail boom's damaged. We're not flying out of here." Mitchell climbed out of his seat and moved to the cargo bay. The door gunner, Specialist Timothy Cole, was already out of the aircraft, weapon ready, scanning the jungle. Webb was pulling gear from the Huey, survival packs, ammunition, medical kit, water. Mitchell dropped down onto the jungle floor and immediately sank 6 inches into soft mud. The air was thick, humid, oppressive. The sound of insects was everywhere. Brennan joined them, his M16 in his hands. "We need to move fast. That crash was loud. If there's anyone within a mile, they heard it." Mitchell agreed. The crash site was a beacon. Every minute they stayed here increased the chance of enemy contact. He looked at Webb. "How much can we carry?" Webb hefted 2 rucksacks. "Enough for 3 days if we're smart. Water's going to be the problem." Cole was still scanning the perimeter, his M60 machine gun trained on the darkest part of the jungle. "Sir, we've got movement. East side. 50 meters. Everyone froze. Mitchell strained to see what Cole was seeing, but the jungle was too thick. Then he heard it. Voices. Distant but getting closer. Vietnamese voices. Multiple contacts. Moving toward the crash site, Mitchell made the decision in less than 2 seconds. Grab what you can. We move north, stay quiet, stay together. If we get separated, rally point is the ridgeline 1 click northwest. Move, now. They moved. 4 men, heavily armed, carrying what they could, pushing through jungle so dense it was like wading through water. Every step was a fight against vines, thorns, and mud that sucked at their boots. Behind them, the voices grew louder. The enemy had found the crash site. Mitchell could hear them calling to each other, searching the wreckage, looking for survivors, looking for them. He pushed harder, forcing his legs to move faster despite the vegetation. Brennan was right behind him. Webb and Cole brought up the rear, moving backwards half the time, weapons ready, covering their escape. They moved for 15 minutes without stopping. Mitchell's uniform was soaked with sweat, his lungs burned, his legs felt like lead, but he didn't slow down. Behind them, the voices had faded, but that didn't mean they were safe. The NVA would be tracking them, experienced trackers. Men who knew this jungle, men who wouldn't stop until they found the American air crew. Mitchell finally called a halt in a small depression surrounded by thick bamboo. They dropped into defensive positions, weapons pointing outward, listening. For 5 minutes, they stayed absolutely still, controlling their breathing, waiting to see if they'd been followed. Nothing. No voices, no movement. Just the jungle and the insects and the sound of their own heartbeats. Brennan crawled over to Mitchell. "We need a plan, sir." Mitchell nodded. He pulled out his map, covered it with his body to hide it from view, and studied their position. 12 miles from Firebase Anderson, 10 miles from the nearest known friendly patrol route. They were in the heart of enemy-controlled territory. The Ashau Valley was crawling with NVA. Infiltration routes, supply caches, base camps. This was their backyard. "We head northeast," Mitchell said quietly. "There's a trail here." He pointed to the map. "That the enemy uses. If we can parallel it without getting too close, it might lead us toward the valley entrance. From there, we can try to reach higher ground and signal for extraction." Brennan studied the map. "That's at least 2 days on foot, maybe 3, through hostile territory, with no radio." Mitchell looked at him. "You have a better idea?" Brennan shook his head. "No, sir. Northeast it is." Mitchell folded the map and tucked it away. He looked at Webb and Cole. "We move at night, hide during the day. No fires, no noise. Weapons unsafe unless we make contact. If we get compromised, we don't stand and fight. We break contact and run, understood?" They all nodded. As the sun began to set, painting the jungle in shades of gold and shadow, the 4 men prepared for what would be the longest night of their lives. They were alone, behind enemy lines, with no communication and no immediate hope of rescue. But they were alive. They were together. They were armed, and they were determined to stay that way. Mitchell checked his watch. 18:23 hours. It would be dark in less than an hour. They would move then. For now, they waited. Silent. Alert. 4 American aircrew in a jungle that wanted them dead. But they had survived the crash, and they would survive this. They had to. The jungle grew darker. The sounds changed. Daytime birds fell silent. Night creatures began to stir. And somewhere in that darkness, the enemy was searching. Searching for 4 men who refused to give up. 4 men who would walk through hell to get home. And that journey was just beginning. Night fell over the Ashau Valley like a curtain dropping on a stage. Within minutes, the jungle transformed from green twilight to absolute darkness. Mitchell couldn't see his hand in front of his face. The canopy above was so thick that not even moonlight penetrated. They would have to navigate by compass and feel, trusting their training and their instincts to keep them moving in the right direction. At 1900 hours, Mitchell gave the signal. They moved out in single file, Mitchell on point, Brennan second, Webb third. Cole bringing up the rear with the M60. They moved slowly, carefully, feeling each step before committing their weight. The jungle floor was treacherous. Roots, vines, holes hidden beneath rotting leaves. One twisted ankle could be fatal out here. They walked for 3 hours, covering maybe 2 miles. Progress was agonizingly slow, but Mitchell didn't dare move faster. Speed meant noise. Noise meant discovery. Discovery meant death. They stopped every 30 minutes to listen, to check their bearing, to make sure they were still together. Communication was done through touch and hand signals they could barely see in the darkness. At 2200 hours, they heard it again. Voices, closer this time. Mitchell froze, raising his fist to signal a halt. Behind him, the others stopped instantly. They sank to the ground, pressing themselves into the mud, weapons ready. The voices grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the jungle, sweeping back and forth. An enemy patrol. Maybe 6 men, maybe more. Moving along a trail less than 30 meters away. Mitchell held his breath. If the patrol deviated from the trail, if they swept just a little wider, they would walk right into the Americans. Cole had the M60 trained on the voices. Webb had his M16 up. Brennan was watching their left flank. They waited. 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. The voices passed. The flashlight beams faded, and then they were gone. Mitchell waited another 5 minutes before moving. When he finally did, he led them away from the trail, deeper into the jungle, putting distance between them and the enemy. They moved for another hour before he called a halt. They were exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear. They needed rest, but they couldn't afford much. Mitchell designated a tiny perimeter in a thicket of bamboo and set a watch rotation. 2 hours per man. Brennan took first watch. Mitchell tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind was racing, running through scenarios, calculating distances, weighing options. They had maybe 3 days of water, less if the heat and exertion took their toll. Food wasn't a problem. They could go a week without food if they had to. But water was life. And they were in a jungle, which meant streams and rivers. But every water source would be watched. The enemy knew that downed aircrew needed water. Webb nudged him. "Sir, you need to rest. You're no good to us, exhausted." Mitchell nodded. Webb was right. He closed his eyes and forced his mind to slow down. Sleep came in fits and starts, filled with dreams of rotor blades and warning lights and voices in the dark. When Brennan woke him for his watch, it felt like he'd only been asleep for minutes. The second night was worse than the first. They were deeper into enemy territory now, following a ridgeline that Mitchell hoped would lead them northeast toward the valley entrance. But the terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, thick vegetation, and everywhere the sense of being watched. They heard patrols twice more. Once they saw fires in the distance, an enemy camp or a village. They gave it a wide berth. By dawn of the third day, they were running low on water. Mitchell made the decision to find a stream. It was risky, but they had no choice. Dehydration would kill them as surely as a bullet. They found a small creek just after sunrise, moving slowly through a ravine. Cole and Webb provided security while Mitchell and Brennan filled their canteens. The water was brown and full of sediment, but they had purification tablets. It would have to do. They were filling the last canteen when Cole hissed a warning. "Contact, 200 meters coming this way." Mitchell looked up. Through the trees, he could see movement. A patrol, larger than the others. Maybe 10 or 12 men, NVA regulars, armed with AKs and RPGs, moving along the creek bank, heading straight toward them. There was no time to run, no time to hide. They were about to be discovered. Mitchell made a split-second decision. Into the water, under the bank, now. They slid into the creek, pressing themselves against the muddy bank beneath an overhang of roots and vegetation. The water was cold and moved fast. Mitchell held his breath as the patrol approached. He could hear their boots on the rocks, their voices. They were close, so close, less than 10 meters away. One of the soldiers stopped directly above them. Mitchell could see his boots through gaps in the vegetation. The soldier was looking at something. Had he seen tracks? Had they left evidence? Mitchell's hand moved to his sidearm. If they were discovered, they would fight. They would make it cost the enemy. But they would die here, in this creek, in this jungle, so far from home. The soldier called out to his comrades. Mitchell didn't speak Vietnamese, but he understood tone. The soldier was asking a question. Another soldier answered. They were discussing something. Mitchell's lungs were burning. He needed to breathe. The soldier above them moved. His boot dislodged a rock. It tumbled down the bank and splashed into the water inches from Brennan's face. And then the soldier walked away. The patrol moved on. The voices faded. Mitchell waited 2 full minutes before allowing himself to breathe normally. They stayed in the water for another 10 minutes, making sure the patrol was truly gone. When they finally climbed out, they were shaking. Not from cold, from the nearness of death. That was too close, Brennan whispered. Mitchell nodded. We need to move faster. We're in the middle of their supply routes. They're everywhere. Webb checked his ammunition. How much further? Mitchell consulted his compass. Maybe 8 miles to the valley entrance. If we can reach the high ground, we can try to signal aircraft, but we need to get there today. We stay out here another night, we're not going to make it. They moved. Faster now, less cautious. Mitchell knew it was a risk, but staying here was a bigger risk. They pushed through the jungle, ignoring the exhaustion, ignoring the pain in their legs and the weight of their gear. They had one goal now. Reach the high ground, signal for help, get home, 1 foot in front of the other. Hour after hour. At 1400 hours, they heard helicopters, American helicopters, Hueys, flying somewhere to the east. Mitchell's heart leaped. They were close to friendly air operations. That meant they were getting close to the edge of enemy territory. He picked up the pace. Behind him, the others followed, driven by the same desperate hope. Home was close. They could feel it. By 1600 hours, they reached the ridgeline Mitchell had been aiming for. It was steep, rocky, and exposed, but it gave them a view of the valley below and the sky above. More importantly, it gave them a place to be seen. Mitchell pulled out his signal mirror and his VS-17 panel, a bright orange marker used for air-to-ground identification. He positioned the panel on the rocks and began flashing the mirror toward the sky. "Come on," he whispered. "Somebody see us. Somebody look down." Brennan was on the radio trying every frequency they knew, hoping that somehow, impossibly, they could get a signal out. Webb and Cole watched the jungle below, weapons ready, knowing that their signal attempts might also attract unwanted attention. Minutes passed. 10, 20, 30. No response. Mitchell kept flashing the mirror. His arm ached. His eyes watered from staring at the bright reflection. But he didn't stop. And then, at 1643 hours, they heard it. A single Huey flying low, following the ridgeline. Mitchell jumped to his feet, waving the orange panel, flashing the mirror. Brennan was shouting into the dead radio, hoping against hope. Cole fired 3 shots into the air, the universal signal for distress. The Huey kept coming, and then it turned. It banked hard left and circled back. The pilot had seen them. The Huey came in low, the door gunner scanning the perimeter with his M60. Mitchell could see the pilot's helmet, the co-pilot pointing at them. The radio in Brennan's hand crackled to life. "Ground party, this is Dustoff 7-2. We have visual, authenticate. What's your unit?" Brennan nearly sobbed with relief. "Dustoff 7-2. We're the crew from Chalk 3-6. Went down 3 days ago. 4 souls. We need immediate extraction." There was a pause. Then, "Chalk 3-6? You're the crew everyone's been looking for. Thought you were KIA, stand by. We're coming in." The Huey flared and settled onto the rocky ridgeline. The skids touched down. The crew chief was waving them in. "Move! Move! Move!" Mitchell didn't need to be told twice. They ran, all 4 of them, ran like their lives depended on it. Because they did. They threw themselves into the Huey. The crew chief pulled them in. "Go, go, go!" he shouted to the pilots. The Huey lifted off, the engine screaming, climbing fast and hard, getting altitude. getting away from the jungle and the enemy and the nightmare they'd been living for 3 days. Mitchell collapsed against the bulkhead, his weapon still in his hands, unable to believe it was over. Brennan was laughing. Actually laughing. Webb had his head in his hands. Cole was staring out the door at the jungle receding below them, as if making sure it was real, making sure they were truly leaving. The crew chief handed them water. Real, cold, clean water. Mitchell drank it like it was the finest thing he'd ever tasted. And maybe it was. Because it was the taste of survival. The taste of home. The Huey banked east, heading back toward Firebase Anderson. Below them, the Aishaw Valley stretched out like a green carpet, beautiful and terrible. Somewhere down there was their crashed Huey. Somewhere down there were the enemy patrols still searching. But they were above it now. They were safe. They had walked through enemy territory for 3 days and 3 nights, and they had survived. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "You boys are lucky. We've had search teams out for 3 days, couldn't find any trace. Figured you were gone." Mitchell keyed his mic. "We're hard to kill." The pilot laughed. "I can see that. Welcome back, gentlemen. Welcome back." As Firebase Anderson came into view on the horizon, Mitchell looked at his crew. Brennan, exhausted but smiling. Webb, cleaning mud from his weapon. Cole, still watching the jungle as if expecting it to reach up and pull them back. They had been ordinary men doing an ordinary job when their helicopter went down, but they had become something more in that jungle. Survivors, brothers, warriors who refused to quit. They had faced the worst the enemy could throw at them. They had walked through hell, and they had come out the other side, together, alive. And that was everything. The Huey touched down at Firebase Anderson at 1712 hours. As Mitchell stepped onto solid ground, he was surrounded by other pilots, crew chiefs, and infantry who had been searching for them. They were slapping his back, shaking his hand, asking how they'd made it. Mitchell didn't have a simple answer. How do you explain survival? How do you explain the decisions made in darkness? The fear overcome, the will to keep moving when every instinct screamed to stop. He looked back at Brennan, Webb, and Cole. They were being checked by medics, given water, wrapped in blankets despite the heat. They looked like they'd been through a war. Because they had. A private, personal war against the jungle, the enemy, and their own exhaustion. And they had won. Later, after debriefing, after medical checks, after the adrenaline had finally worn off, Mitchell sat alone on his bunk, staring at the map he'd carried through the jungle. He traced the route they'd taken with his finger, 12 miles. It didn't look like much on paper, but he knew that every mile had been earned, every step had been a victory. Brennan found him there. "How you doing, sir?" Mitchell looked up. "I keep thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong. If we'd crashed harder, if the radio had worked and given away our position, if that patrol had looked down, if we hadn't found water, if we'd gone the wrong direction. Any one of those things and we'd be dead." Brennan nodded. "But none of those things happened. We made good decisions. We worked together. We didn't give up." Mitchell smiled. "No, we didn't give up." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Brennan spoke again. "Think we'll fly again?" Mitchell didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow, as soon as they clear us, because that's what we do." The next morning, Mitchell was back in a Huey. Different aircraft, different mission, but the same job. Flying in Vietnam, taking risks, supporting troops. Because what had happened in that jungle hadn't broken him. It had proved something he'd always believed, that when everything went wrong, when the odds were impossible, when survival seemed unlikely, the human spirit could endure, could adapt, could overcome. The story of Chalk 3-6 spread through the aviation units in Vietnam. 4 men downed behind enemy lines who walked out alive. It became a story told in ready rooms and mess halls, a reminder that even when a helicopter went down in enemy territory, even when everything seemed lost, there was still hope, still a chance, still a reason to keep fighting. Years later, long after the war ended, Mitchell would be asked about those 3 days. about what kept him going, about how they survived. His answer was always the same. We survived because we refused to accept any other outcome. We survived because we had each other, and we survived because giving up was never an option. In 1968, a helicopter went down in enemy territory. 4 men were supposed to die that day, but they didn't. They walked through enemy-controlled jungle for 3 days. They evaded patrols. They found water. They made it to high ground, and they were rescued. Against all odds, against all expectations, they came home. And that story, that moment of triumph against impossible circumstances, became part of the legend of American helicopter crews in Vietnam. Not because they were special, not because they were superhuman, but because they were ordinary men who did something extraordinary. They survived. Together. And in doing so, they proved that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. One step at a time. Until you reach safety. Until you reach home. If you found this story powerful, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. We bring you stories from the Vietnam War every week. Real missions, real heroes, real history. Don't miss the next episode. See you next time.
Vietnam War. The sky was not a safe place. Every mission was a gamble between coming back or vanishing. This is their story.